everybody, this is Geronimo from the Beyond Taboo podcast and also co-founder of Chill to Grow. And I'm here joined by Christopher Ortega, certified sexologist. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm good. How are you? And thank you also for inviting me.
No worries, it's a pleasure to have you. Everything well over here in Buenos Aires. Cloudy day, there's some hot. Where are you calling from?
I'm Michigan in the United States, and so we're actually having a sunny day because here in Michigan, you never know, the weather changes so much.
That's nice. So Christopher, first of all, thanks for joining us. People, just for you to know, Christopher, I thought it would be a great idea to invite Christopher to discuss his experience as a sexologist. He has some interesting insights. He mainly works with men, so I'm really looking forward to getting to that. So I really think we could touch on some certain interesting topics today. And if you're ready, I'd love to start with my first question. How does it sound?
Absolutely.
Okay. So, Christopher, you mentioned you work mainly with men when we first met. So, currently, these days, what are the usual topics that make men hit your door at where you work, you know? I mean, what are the most common topics you're hearing lately between men that you get to discuss or approach on your consultations?
Yeah, so I think one of the main things that really kind of gets men that come seek me out is one, I am a man. So, they feel more comfortable talking to an actual male about issues,
Hmm.
which is actually kind of unique because men tend to shut down when it comes to talking to their own peers, but as a therapist, they feel more comfortable opening up. But majority of the time, the men that come seek help from me are dealing with erectile dysfunction,
All right.
delayed ejaculation,
Hmm.
um, a lot of times just anxiety and depression in general is,
Okay.
and that all ties back into their sexual health problems that are coming up. But one of the also common things that I tend to see people for are the exploration of open relationships, ethical non-monogamy, or polyamory.
Hmm, that sounds interesting. So there's lots of certain things you get to work with. Well, when we first talked, I was surprised to hear that lots of your clients go to you to work on the delayed ejaculation issue, which is something, sure, I mean, we've all read or even experienced this issue. But from what you said, it made me think that, well, maybe there's a little bit more about this than what we usually know or get to read. So when we talk about delayed ejaculation, what's happening there? I mean, how do you approach this situation? I mean, what are the reasons that um, make men experience this sort of difficulty?
Yeah, so I see everyone is so different. So every person that comes to me with the delayed ejaculation is not going to have the same solution or the same problem. But some of the most common ones are, work-life balance stressors. If if we're overwhelmed and we're dealing with significant depression or anxiety, we're not going to be present in the moment. So we're actually not really enjoying sex. We feel it.
Hmm.
It might feel good, but we're not present. So our mind is somewhere else.
Hmm.
And when we're not
That's interesting.
focused, yeah, and that's the thing is basically when we're not focused, well, that can lead to us not having an orgasm.
Hmm. Well, I think it's very interesting, I mean, it's a topic I haven't researched much, to be honest. So I find it very interesting, especially because you mentioned not being focused or maybe distracted. So in other terms, we could say it's a sort of issue related to not being able to connect with the other person. Sure, being present means that, definitely. But compared to, for example, premature ejaculation, leaving aside the physiological reasons that may lay behind the problem, and those two things, I mean, probably from a more psychological perspective, have a lot of they are very related to the impossibility of connecting with the other. So it's interesting, I mean, workload you mentioned. So how do you approach this issue? I mean, how do you help a man connect with the significant being?
Well, and that also kind of ties into when we talk about connection is, work-life balance is one of them, but if we're dealing with issues with our relationships,
Hmm.
well, then that desire component might not be there. We might just be having sex because we're trying to stop an argument, or we might feel like it's something we have to do. And
Wow.
that kind of ties into a lot of societal male messages.
Hmm.
And a lot of men get that, well, you have to be able to have sex. You have to be ready to go. And when men can't perform, that really impacts how they view themselves.
Hmm.
Because again, all those societal male messages that are all up over here are saying, hey, you have to be able to do this.
Hmm.
And that women also take in that same information. So they think men should enjoy sex all the time or be wanting it all the time. And that's not the case.
Hmm.
So desire is a big component that we look at as sex therapists is, where is that desire at? Because we might want sex, but we don't desire it at that time because we're emotionally worn out.
Well, that's very interesting because for sure, I mean, there's the whole relationship between desire and the absence of it and how those two fuel each other. But certainly things complicate a lot when there are circumstances that definitely impact on the sole possibility of having desire. So yeah, I mean, it must be difficult. I mean, sure, you mentioned being ready, but I'm curious, what are the other social mandates you get to work or demystify with men during your consultations?
So one of the big things I always like to tell everyone is we call it the good enough sex model. So everyone think like society, music, movies, right? Sex is supposed to be this mind-blowing volcanic eruption, and that's not always the case. So the
Hmm.
good enough sex model focuses on 15% of our sexual experiences are going to be what we call dysfunctional. They maybe weren't so great, they didn't go as planned. The other 15% are going to be that mind blowing volcanic eruption. That was the best sex I've ever had. But in the middle there, that 70%, well, that is what we just call good enough sex. It was great. It worked, or, it could have been better, but at least they got to connect. And that's what we want to try to do is live in that 70%, not always strive for the 15
Hmm.
percent of mind-blowing sex, and not always focus on the 15 of dysfunctional sex.
Hmm. Okay, makes sense. Yeah, it's very helpful to think it in those terms. I mean, well, we as men, we usually hear those things, like you need to be ready, or maybe you start fearing the health of your marriage or your relationship because you aren't able to give enough in that sense. Enough, I'm quoting. So, how do you, I mean, sure, I guess a part of feeling better about the whole thing is accepting, accepting that sort of percentages you mentioned. But how do you approach I mean, how, for example, you make good enough sex better but simple? I mean, without obviously putting extra pressure to both parties on the relationship.
Mhm.
I mean, trying to push them to something. I mean, sure, I guess, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. I guess there could be a part where there's men like feeling bad about how maybe they can't connect, but there's also probably men looking to improve their sex life. So, how do those two different opposites relate through this same issue?
Yeah. So this is kind of breaking it up in two parts. The first is we have to tackle when we have a sexual dysfunction, whether that's,
Okay.
delayed ejaculation, erectile dysfunction. The first part is accepting that that's normal, that
Okay.
everyone is going to experience that in their lifetime, but it doesn't have to control how we view ourselves. So usually what happens is the first occurrence happens, regardless of whatever dysfunction it happens, and then we get trapped in that psychological loop of that was so embarrassing, or I don't feel like a man, or
Hmm.
what if my partner is talking about it, to her friends, or so we get stuck in that. So the next time we go to have sex,
Hmm.
and this ties back into the being present part, we're not present. We're in here worried that we're going to have another bad sexual experience. We're not going to get an erection. We're not going to be able to have an orgasm. So we end up creating that self-fulfilling prophecy. So because we're not present, we're not enjoying the moment, we end up actually causing the very dysfunction to occur.
Hmm. Makes
Of
sense.
course, there are biological components, right,
For
that
sure.
can hinder that. But if we're looking at a pure psychological point of view, yeah, we're creating our own problem.
Well, I mean, I think it's something we all experience somehow. I mean, the inability to connect. I mean, it's easier to think about this when we talked about education or when we talk about relating to friends or socially. I mean, our attention spans, how distracted we are, the problems we have with technology and social media these days. It's definitely logical to think this can also impact your sex life. So, but I feel, I mean, we have written a couple of articles about not being present or not being able to connect sexually, those type of circumstances. And sure, the self-fulfilling prophecy can definitely provoke the sexual dysfunction, but I'm also interested about these different scenarios where, for example, we can just realize, we can just realize that we're not connecting. We are like in automatic mode, and even first thing you do after you orgasm is grab the phone. So how do you work towards awareness with these sort of cases? I mean, what would be like the practical toolkit you usually share with your clients?
Yeah, so when it comes to this, and this is something I do with every client, is we have to explore, what does sex mean? What were the messages
Hmm.
about sex in your life? And that could be anything. Sex was not talked about, it was shunned. So there could be a guilt feeling associated with that. So sex feels great. We have an orgasm, we feel awesome. For some people, that might be quickly followed with a feeling of ick or shame or guilt.
Hmm.
So that is we have sex, I run up and I get to the shower, or we then go, yeah, look at our phone. the other part is, when we look at our schedules, sometimes we don't have a lot of time. So we might look at our partner and say, hey, let's go have sex right now. And we do, but we rush.
Hmm.
And then we hop right out of bed and we go back. So there's all those parts. We are having sex, but we either feel guilty about it, we don't feel connected with our partner, or we don't actually sit back and reflect on the experience. So one thing I always do is say, let's start out with just slowing down.
Hmm.
And
Great
I
point.
always, yeah, just slow right down and just, relax. Engage in foreplay. You don't have to go straight to penetration. And foreplay can be kissing, cuddling, manual stimulation, anything.
Or sex. I mean,
Yeah.
we usually think about it like foreplay, and sometimes that category make us feel that we're not having sex enough, or that it's not sex.
And then I'm so glad you said that because that is actually the thing is what is the definition of sex?
Hmm.
And the reality is sex is basically focused on the connection. But everyone has, if you went around and asked a bunch of people, what does sex mean to you? Their first response is going to be, right, some form of penetration, whether that's vaginally, anally, or orally, but it's some form of penetration. But if we re-alter what we actually view as sex, as it's that connection of being with a partner, of
Hmm.
even having sex with ourselves, we don't think of masturbation as sex, but
Hmm.
it is a form of sex, and we connect intimately with our own body every time we masturbate.
Hmm.
But we're also taught too as children, not every family, but the majority of families, are don't we don't want to hear about it, we don't want to talk about it, somewhere it's shameful, it's guilty. So I'm sure you can even think back as a young boy, right, whenever you had a chance to masturbate, it was we gotta rush and hide it, get it done super quick, and
Hmm.
so I don't get caught.
Yeah, that
That
can
carries,
certainly condition not just psychologically, but physiologically too.
yeah, yeah, because our goal is to just get to that orgasm and be done and over with. And then we feel shameful if we get caught by someone, by a parent, or heck, even our partners. Some people are uncomfortable even just masturbating and having their partner know about it. So we create this stigma that's attached to sex, and we don't actually enjoy it. We don't spend that time in our own body and understand certain sensitive areas.
Hmm. You know, this question, you like the first step you take with your clients, what is sex? I think it's a great question. We should all ask ourselves. And I think, yeah, like you just said, maybe most people just chase the orgasm, like get the orgasm and not probably seek the connection, which then make us wonder what makes sex good, I mean, what makes sex satisfactory for you. So I guess also that's something you then tackle or discuss with men or women.
And when I ask either sex, what is a satisfying sexual experience for you? It usually involves a blank look of, well, I don't really know how to describe that. And
Hmm, that's
a lot of
interesting.
people, yeah, a lot of people don't actually know what that is for them. They know what it is for other people or what they think it should be based off of society or, again, media, but
Hmm.
for themselves, they don't actually know. And so I send all my clients with homework after the very first session I meet with them. And I'm like, your homework this week is to explore your body.
Hmm.
And basically, and that's all it is. It's about taking time, whether it's 5 minutes, 20 minutes, or an hour, and just explore your body. Run your fingers over your skin, touch different areas. You can even apply warm, cold, different objects, different touches, everything, and just explore it and see how you feel when you're not being rushed.
Hmm. That's a great homework.
Yeah.
Like, great first step. I mean, great start to see, well, sexologists are really important, you know. I mean, enjoying sex is one of the most great things, you know, the greatest things in the world. So the possibility of helping someone to just be able to enjoy that, I mean, I'm sure it must be very rewarding.
It it is, especially when, when people come to me, sometimes they're broke down at that point because they've tried everything, or they've been so shut down they haven't been able to talk about it, and they're just worn down. And it's just awesome to watch them progress. Everyone moves at their own pace. Someone might move a little faster, and like 3 or 4 sessions in, they're already making significant progress. Some move at a slower pace, but when they hit that moment, I always know. And it's like they come into the session, and I'll be like, well, how was this week? How did we do on our homework assignment? And they just start smiling, and they're like, I had sex this weekend. My erection stayed firm, or you know what? I actually was present and I had an orgasm, and I haven't been able to do that with a physical person in years. And they're
Wow.
just, you see it in their face, their body language, and you just see this relief.
Hmm. Yeah. Because it definitely starts to build up as frustration.
Yes. And then they start to think about themselves differently at that point. Those negative ideas, we call them cognitive distortions. But we develop those when things aren't going right, and we start to believe them. So someone that might be experiencing sexual dysfunction might have this negative view of themselves, like, I'm worthless,
Hmm.
I'm not a woman, I'm not a man, and they believe it. And then my job is, we're gonna we can't make those go away. They come in, they're just
Hmm.
automatic, they pop in,
Yeah.
but we're not gonna listen to them anymore. We're gonna challenge those and not let them take over.
Well, that's a great assignment too. I mean, it's probably most of the time inevitable to wonder or think about those questions, those mandates. I mean, sex is very much like one place that really, for society at least, defines if you are a man or not, or if you are a woman or not. I mean, if you're man enough or feminine enough. So when those things start to, I don't know, when you leave them aside and focus on enjoying, I mean, certainly things click for most people. And I also
And
think, sorry, and I also think that, I mean, it's very interesting because from what you're telling, I feel like pretty much just starting to talk about these things makes instant results.
yeah, and that's something, as society, we need to start changing, is this idea that men can't be sensitive or talk about sex in a different light. Right now, everyone thinks, right, men are those kind of nasty guys. They only talk about sexual dirty things, or they talk about their last night stand they had. And but we never actually see men sit down and talk about actual emotional feelings around sex, about not feeling good about sex, or feeling
Hmm.
pressure to have sex, or just simply saying, yeah, I couldn't perform last night and it was really stressful and I felt bad. You're probably not going to see a good chunk of men having those type of discussions with their
Yeah.
pals.
I mean, it
But we need
depends. I definitely, I'm totally agree. It's difficult to talk about these things when you are not surrounded by positivity. around sex, you know? I mean, or where the groups where they don't just mock you for a failed experience, you know?
Well, and right, and some of those groups, right? You always hear, yeah, we went for like an hour and a half last night. I'm always like, really? You did? Because that sounds exhausting, because that is not a normal sexual experience. And I don't know too many people that would actually want that.
Hmm.
The reality is a positive sexual experience can last anywhere from 5 minutes to 20 minutes. And everyone's going to be different. Sometimes you might last a little more, you might last a little less, and that's okay. But no one is doing a solid, straight penetration pumping action for an hour and a half without full on getting
Boring
exhausted.
also. Like, let's add some variety there, you know?
Right? And but that ties into kind of how men talk. So if they say, "Yeah, we had sex for like 20 minutes last night. It was awesome," they're not going to be saying that. They're going to be worried about getting ridiculed there. So yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, that's an interesting one because I don't think it's not like you can't talk about time. I mean, you could certainly take time as like, I don't know, like you've really connected. So you had sex like not all night, but you know, you devoted some good amount of time to the whole experience. It's just the way you communicate it that it really changes everything, you know, because you could certainly say, oh, we had sex like, I don't know, it was great, like, I don't know, 3 hours. Or you could say, yeah, I had sex with her like 3 hours, you know, like feeling like more macho about it, you know.
Yeah. What I would love is to see men actually have a conversation of, hey, how did last night go? I was great. I connected with this person, and we had sex, but afterwards we hung out and just talked and laughed, and we really kind of connected. I would love to hear more of those stories versus, yeah, I hit it hard last night. It was
Hmm.
good, and then I got up and left.
Yeah, I mean, I'm there with you. You know, I also think that I'm not sure how things are fully over there, but I think globally, maybe we could say that, well, there was a lot of criticism that built towards being manly in general, I mean, in society, which part of that I think it's great. I mean, it was very useful for men to think about themselves and what makes them men. But also, after some time, I feel like the situation we are right now is a bit like some men are a bit lost about what can be talked, you know. I mean, what makes you less man, or if it's because suddenly lots of people stop, you know, sharing those juicy details you get to share with friends, you know. I mean, which can easily turn into like sexual prowess, definitely. But I feel like there's like a scenario where, yeah, sometimes men aren't so sure about what can be naturally talked with their friends, you know?
Yeah, and that definitely falls into the line of consent, right? Because we always want to kind of get that consent from people we're going to share sexual details with. Like, hey, are you comfortable with me sharing about a sexual experience? Right? That goes a long way, right? Like, because you could just flat out just start, dumping that story out there, and then you make people feel uncomfortable because they didn't want to hear that. So yeah, I do want to hear people had talk more openly about sex and the benefits, and not focus on sex as this negative thing. But we also have to incorporate that consent with people when we do it. Is it okay that I have this conversation with you?
Yeah, that's true. That's definitely, that's not a habit shared by many people, I think, you know? But yeah, you have a point. I think it's true. I mean, sometimes there's such confidence between your friends or with whomever, and you just start spitting the whole story, you know?
Yeah. Well, and that's also things, men, because a lot of men have trauma too, and men are don't like to talk about trauma very well. They usually hold it down and they, try to avoid it, or they kind of self-medicate in different ways, but we never know what might trigger someone, especially when we're talking about sex. And so that's why it's always important to, yeah, say, hey, would you be okay if I kind of shared about the sexual experience with you? Because if you start talking about something and someone has experienced a sexual trauma, that could kind of trigger something back because they haven't yet processed it.
That's true. Good point. Hmm. Yeah, that's very complex. I mean, it's already complex between women and more with men. I mean, it means like showing more vulnerability, and that's definitely, like you said, something we really need to, if you will, practice. So, yeah,
And you mentioned, right, the topic of masculinity, and that's another thing that we need to do is redefine what that means. Because I don't know about over there, but over here in the States, we often hear the word toxic masculinity a lot. And that's right, those are all those negative traits that men have kind of been taught of how to behave or act or what they think they should behave. But we need to redefine, what does the word masculinity mean?
yeah,
And it doesn't have to have one definition. What is considered masculine to one person can be a completely different thing for another. So we don't need just a definition. We need to allow everyone to have their own definition and respect that.
that's definitely true. Yeah, we had a great conversation with Erin, another sexologist we invited some time ago, about the same thing, the same topic, like what means to be a man today, and certainly that's an answer people need to find by themselves, in most cases. I mean, sure, there are some general guidelines and these traits you mentioned, but in order, if a part, I guess, because it's totally right, but if a part of our confidence is going to be built related to what being a man is, you certainly need to challenge, or at least have clear in your mind what being a man means for you. I'm not sure if I'm being clear enough, that I think you get it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that actually ties right back to the very beginning of our conversation, right? When someone is dealing with a sexual dysfunction,
Hmm.
all that ties in. How do I view myself? How are other people viewing me? And if we're struggling with that and we're not present, right, that's where we create that self-fulfilling prophecy, and the ED, delayed ejaculation, or any other dysfunction kicks right back in.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
it's not as simple as, right. Some people think, oh, it's just this one quick fix, right? I get some Viagra or something, and that's going to fix it. It's this onion, and we have all these layers that we got to peel off and try to uncover where the actual issue is. And sometimes there's multiple layers that have multiple issues.
Hmm. Yeah, that's true. I mean, and the whole story a person may have to unwrap all those layers, So
Yeah.
I was thinking, Christopher, maybe just to wrap up, I was thinking that maybe we could close with this question. So we talked about, well, you just mentioned how usually when you choose let go of the expectations society lay upon men to, well, enjoy better sex or be able to connect. But there's also a portion, and I think this is in line with what I was saying before. There's also a portion of those, let's say, norms or social mandates or things that we usually see as common sense. Uh, Feeling sexy about how you perform. I don't know. Feeling sexy about how you moved last time, which could easily fall into those social mandates category we talked about. So, considering we could say it's normal for someone to feel good about how they move or whatever, how do you think it's the easiest way to find balance between those two extremes, if you will?
That's that's part of that is just acceptance. Accepting you're not always going to have the best experience,
Hmm.
but it doesn't mean it has to be a bad one either. And sometimes we just have to be present, focus on what went right, not always what went wrong, and kind of reframe our expectations. If we always go into anything, not just sex, but a date, a connection, anything that we're doing, and we have this expectation that it's going to be this mind-blowing, perfect thing, and we start to already set ourselves up for failure, just try to be present and just go with the flow. Don't add an expectation, just be present.
I think that's great advice. Really, great advice. So, well, everybody, there you have it. Christopher Ortega. Great advice, great insights. It was a pleasure to have you today, Chris. I hope you had fun today. And
Thank yeah.
no, that's all.
Oh, yeah, thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here, and because these are topics we have to talk about and that often we don't. And yeah, so I'm always down to breaking barriers and
Definitely.
trying to help people.
And let's do this again sometime. I really had fun today. You touched on very interesting topics. So yeah, let's do this another time. So thank you, Chris, for being here today.
Thank you.